I wanted to say a few words about bubbles for everyone who hasn't had a chance yet to read my book about breaking bubbles and awakening oneness. So why is this concept of breaking bubbles so important to you in your life? Well, bubbles are a fundamental aspect of how we experience the world around us. They're actually a fundamental aspect of our consciousness. It's just an aspect that we don't observe directly. So to sort of give it an idea of what the bubbles are really about, if you think about your everyday life and how your mind moves through your everyday life, what you might observe is that you tend to move from a world of one thing to a world of something else to a world of something else, and inside of each one of those little worlds, you're thinking about things in a certain way, you're relating things together in a certain way. You have patterns for your consciousness that you repeat over and over and over again. And so each one of those patterns is contained within a bubble. The bubbles are, in fact, very limited realities. A little bubble of a limited reality that contains information of some sort, something that is the trigger or the core of what the bubble is about. Maybe it has images or beliefs and it has feelings, but your consciousness is part of it. And when your consciousness is in the bubble, it's going to flow through certain patterns always in the same way. You have the same reaction over and over again every time you enter the limited reality of that bubble. And that bubble separates you and separates your consciousness from the greater world around you. It separates your consciousness and limits it from being able to choose other paths and other ways of experiencing the world around you. So let me give a kind of an analogy. If you imagine that your everyday life was taken up with rubbing against green things that are really irritating, and they're rubbing against your skin, and you have to come up with strategies for avoiding this one and getting around that one, and this is what your life is essentially all about, is getting around these green things. And then one day you look around and you say, oh my goodness, yeah, all of these green things have the same form. I'm approaching these moment to moment, but they have the same form. And let's call the form a tree. They're a tree. I'm surrounded by lots of trees. This is analogous to realizing that your consciousness flows through patterns that are bubbles. That you're surrounded by bubbles. It's all around you. And if you realize that there are these trees around you in your environment and you go walking through the forest, at some point you could come to the edges of the forest, and then you realize, oh yeah, there's a forest. All of these trees grouped together, and together they make up this larger structure. If you follow the bubbles, they can lead you to the edges where you find the borders of collective consciousness. That the forest is like a collection of bubbles that are maintained by many, many people. A collective consciousness is a system of bubbles that are all grouped together and associated. So, long as you're inside the forest, most of what you can think about is trees, whatever these trees are. If you escape the forest, if you can find the boundaries to get outside of collective consciousness and break the bubbles that have kept you there, then your consciousness is free to roam in new places, to explore new things. That's why we're going to be busy breaking bubbles. So let's take a practical example and say, for instance, that you find that you have a pattern when you think about getting close in personal relationships, some fear comes up. And that fear is maybe a fear that you're going to be trapped and limited by this relationship. And what happens is that every time you get close to a personal relationship like this fear comes in and it affects your behavior. So you find yourself having a very difficult time connecting with these kinds of personal relationships, because every time you get close to one, your consciousness is going back through the same patterns again. The fear comes up and you think about this new situation in the same way that you've thought about old situations. So where's the bubble in this? This is a bubble that separates your experience from the oneness of everything that's around us. Inside that bubble are the materials that you have associated about close relationships. And inside that bubble you have your fears, your patterns of thinking. Now maybe there's a basis for this. Maybe you're afraid of close relationships because of your experience with your parents. Well, that's tied up with this also. Maybe you've got a belief. You have formulated a belief inside of yourself that close relationships are dangerous. And so you don't want to be in close relationships because they're going to hurt you. So there's this bubble. It's a limited reality in which all of this appears to be true. It all appears to be true because you have experience to back it up. You've experienced before. When you go into new situations, you experience it in the same way again. There's the bubble. And your consciousness is caught in this. And of course, we can cancel the belief that relationships are dangerous for us. But in fact, canceling the belief doesn't finish the job, because there's the whole context around this. Everything that you've associated together that makes this little reality in which that belief seems sensible. So what we have to do is break the bubble. Break the bubble and expose what was inside of that bubble to a greater reality in which you realize that relationships are not necessarily dangerous, that you see them in a broader context, that in fact you want to be in relationships because it's healthy. It's healthy for you. And so that gives a little practical demonstration of, how bubbles are an important part of our everyday life and our everyday consciousness. And everything we perceive and everything that we experience in our day-to-day life is a product of something that's contained within bubbles. And the more bubbles we break, the more we liberate ourselves to make free choices, to be able to choose our own path, and especially in our spiritual development, to choose the higher path for ourselves and to choose to bring ourselves along a path that can awaken oneness in our lives. Thank you.